Oregon's newest transfer is defensive lineman Bear Alexander, and I have questions.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com to get yourself started. How much better does the defense need to be next year? That's a question. Bear Alexander is certainly going to try to help, and it's Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So I thought Tennessee would win the game, and alas, they did not. SEC. Okay, I'm not doing that right now. Over on Locked On College Football, though, definitely did. So Bear Alexander's newest transfer. I have questions here. I certainly see the upside. You've got a former borderline 5-star recruit who was a top 5 defensive lineman in his class in the 22 cycle, a guy with elite physical traits, a guy who has shown glimpses during his college football career. He's 6'3", he's 315 pounds. He certainly has the potential to be a high-level contributor or an all-conference caliber guy. His composite rating, by the way, was .9782, so just shy of being a 5-star. I think he was a 5-star at one point. Last guy that Oregon had that happen to along the D-line was Mateo Uiagalelei. He's pretty darn good. So Alexander played on the Georgia National Championship team in 2022, and then the last 2 years, he played at USC. My questions are twofold. Number one, can Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy and Tony Tuioti, the defensive line coach, get the most out of him? Because we haven't seen anything close to that yet. And by the way, I have not heard or read or seen anything regarding him being a problem in the locker room or having off-the-field issues, but this is a guy who is now going to his 3rd school. He went to 4 different high schools as well. So everywhere that he's been, he has not been able to settle in and maximize his full potential. In high school, you can argue he did. He was a big-time recruit, but so far in college, he has not been able to find one spot that has really worked for him. So Dan Lanning has to go out and try to do that. And that's as much a mental thing for this coaching staff with Bear Alexander as a physical thing. So that's the first question I have. The second question and I'm not saying they can't do it, I'm saying this is what has to happen. This, to me, is not a Derek Harmon level addition. It's kind of like Jordan Burch. I'll get to that in a moment. But question number 2 that I have is, does he still have that full potential ceiling in there? If you look at his PFF grades over the last couple of seasons, he has not done anything special. He's been just okay to grading below average. Now, is that a be-all, end-all for how good a guy is? No. Is it a data point that I find to be legitimate, particularly with linemen? Most of the time, yes. Not all the time, but most of the time, I think they do a pretty darn good job. If you look at the ratings for Oregon's defensive linemen this year, for example, you know who have the 2 highest grades? Jordan Burch and Mateo Uiagalelei. And they're both over 75. So is Tatum Tuioti, by the way. I know people have mixed opinions on Pro Football Focus, but the track record that Bear Alexander has coming into the 2025 season with Oregon, I don't think is even as successful as what Jordan Burch had at South Carolina. Now, Burch was not living up to his full potential over there, and he's really realized it at Oregon, undoubtedly. But Jordan Burch at South Carolina was a better player than Bear Alexander was at USC the last couple of years. That doesn't mean Bear Alexander can't become a good player. It just means that this is a move where I see the ceiling as being incredibly high because he's experienced. He's been in college weight rooms. He's not new to the game. He's seen plenty of playing time. He transferred away from USC kind of in the middle of the season. He played in just 3 games, kept a red shirt, I presume, and then comes to Oregon and is probably going to be one of the starting defensive linemen. Would it completely shock me if he was the number 3 guy instead of the number 1 or 2 guy? It would not. However, I can also readily foresee a world in which he is the best interior defensive lineman Oregon has, though I am bullish, and I mean bullish, on Amari Washington. I think that guy has got NFL potential written all over him. So if that's your starting tandem for the defensive line next year, that makes plenty of sense to me. But Jordan Burch had played 3 seasons of college football. He's a 2020 recruit, and Bear Alexander has technically played 3, but he didn't really play a whole heck of a lot this year when he hit the transfer portal. And I believe Lanning recruited him when he was still at Georgia, going back to that 22 class. This has kind of been a dance and tiptoe, for the last couple of years. Like, his name has come up on this show and many others several times over the last couple of years as, hey, would he ever transfer to Oregon? Lanning recruited him and he's got this tie and went to USC, and then he, was going to transfer from USC, but then that didn't end up being true. He stayed at USC, but now he didn't want to be, and now he gets to come up to Oregon. And I certainly feel like Oregon's defensive staff is far more capable of getting Bear Alexander to be a good football player than USC's. That's unquestioned. So I'm not sitting here doubting that Dan Lanning can make this guy a high-end starter. I'm saying I don't expect as much from him as I did from, say, a Derek Harmon or even a Jamari Caldwell. I think he's play style-wise closer to Caldwell than Harmon. And by the way, Jamari Caldwell, darn good football player, been a starter this year, but in just under 70 snaps this year, Bear Alexander has a PFF grade of 57. That's straight up bad, but that was at USC. And Oregon has shown in a number of instances that they can get more out of guys than what they had at their previous stops. Burch was okay to good at South Carolina. He's become great. Nico Reed was kind of average at Colorado, was kind of average last year. He's become great this year for Oregon. So I just wonder. I wonder how that works out. I think his ceiling is where you want a transfer addition to be at any position group. I think his floor is lower than other transfers than Oregon has brought in over the last couple of cycles. And speaking of USC transfers, by the way, Deuce Robinson, who was a wide receiver / tight end that Oregon was maybe looking at the transfer portal, or at least could have, he committed to Florida State. So that option is off the board. I'll talk more about the idea of a transfer wide receiver on tomorrow's show, but for now, I want your thoughts on Bear Alexander. Let me know in the comments below. Dante Moore or Austin Novosad, one of those guys is starting next year. One of those guys. What does that mean for the defense that will now include Bear Alexander? That's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Well, guess what? They can if they haven't already. Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. Not good in realignment, but good financially. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions alone, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Check them out today. Never doubt that second segment sips take place. They are essential, like having a bunch of quality defensive linemen. So, how about that? This question from Puff Dutch 2. If you want to get into the mailbag YouTube comments, that's a good way to do it. Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB or at LockedOnDucks. DMs and mentions both wide open to submit questions. If you want priority access and a bunch of other perks, become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. Puff Dutch 2 says, asks, I should say. We won't have as mobile a quarterback next year for the first time in a long time. How does that change the offense? I think Dante can sling it, no doubt, but up-tempo, RPO, ZRO, I'll be honest, I don't know what ZRO means. I know what RPO means. Won't work as well without the threat of the quarterback breaking it. So let me come back to that one. Let me start with the next question, which kind of builds off this question, but I'm going to go in reverse order here. Uno reverse card coming at you. Krondianic asks if the defense needs to be even better with Dante Moore at quarterback. The answer there is we don't know. You don't know. I don't know. Heck, Dan doesn't even know. Nobody actually knows. The reason is that Dante Moore, as a quarterback, is a bit of an enigma. He's not entirely unknown. We have some data points. And so the nature of your question, I presume, is stemming from what we saw from him when he started as a true freshman at UCLA before he was ready to with a reloading UCLA team where he could have gotten pulled for a veteran at any time. Lo and behold, he did. So when he got thrown into the fire, we know he wasn't able to succeed. News alert, most guys are not. When he is given time, we don't know what he is. The only time he's come into the game this year is when it's been completely over with. And Oregon's had it in control, and he's just coming in for mop-up duty. This is a guy who has immense potential. Guess what? So did a guy I'm going to talk about more on tomorrow's show. Ty Thompson had immense potential. Don't know if you watched the bowl game he got to start. It went really poorly for him. And he's been around college football for several years at this point. And he wasn't able to find it. So the idea of Dante Moore starting after sitting for a year could be great. It could also be kind of what you're worried about. Like, hey, does the defense need to be even better than it is? I think with Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy at the helm defensively, Oregon fans should just expect the defense to play at the level it is at this year every single season. When you can reload in the transfer portal every year, and when you look at the way they have been recruiting and the number of high school guys that are in fact, I know that Oregon's just transfers and whatnot. Yeah, no, there are a lot of guys who are going to be on this defense for multiple years. Think about this. This defensive line is going to lose Jamari Caldwell, Derek Harmon, and Jordan Birch. Huge losses. You've replaced one of those guys with Bear Alexander. See what happens with the rest of those blue chip defensive linemen who are going to be redshirt sophomores next year. You know, Amari Washington will have a bigger role. Mateo Uyunglele went from kind of a specialist, spotty contributor in his freshman year to, oh, look, he leads the Big Ten in sacks in year 2. What does his year 3 jump look like? What does Tatum Tuiotti's year 3 jump look like? Both of those guys tremendously talented and have not shown anything but an upward trajectory so far. So when you look at how Oregon is recruited, the way they've developed, the production that has been taking place on the field, I think it is fair to expect Oregon to play at that defensive level or close to it year in and year out. Does that mean that it's required to step up a level if Oregon's going to be as good this year? It might not matter. Because however well a defense plays, the offense has to be able to hold its own. Defense is not going to score for you very often. Go ask Iowa. So your defense, yes, helps out your offense. Your offense, yes, helps out your defense. Sustain a couple drives. Give the defense a break. Give them a lead to play with. All of those things, complementary football, very real. Something Oregon has done exceptionally well this season. But Dante Moore, as a passer, could be even better than Dillon Gabriel. You don't know. I don't know. We haven't seen how that plays out yet. See, we're just getting our wires crisscrossed there. Dante Moore as a passer might not be anywhere close to as good as Dillon Gabriel. We don't know yet. But if Dante Moore is good in 2025 and the defense stays at the same level, Oregon's a 10-plus win team with the schedule they have. Absolutely. Might not be 12-0. Newsflash, you don't go 12-0 every year. Oregon's done it twice in the history of Oregon football. So, long-winded way of answering your question to say, no. I'm not looking at the defense as, oh my gosh, they've got to take leaps and bounds forward for Oregon to be just as good. No, Oregon's ability to have as much success next year as they have had this year relies on Dante Moore, regardless of what the defense does. So I don't think the defense could take a big enough step forward because they were already so good this year. I don't think they could take such a huge leap that the offense can suddenly go put up 25 points per game and Oregon wins. No, I don't think that's the way that fans should think about it, and I know that's not the way coaches and players are thinking about it. Now, back to the first question, the mobile quarterback component. Dillon Gabriel has run spottily this year. It has not been a feature of Oregon's offense this season. Of course, we know he is incredibly capable as a runner, and there were a couple spots, the option against Oregon State, the touchdown run against Ohio State. There were a couple nice runs in the Illinois game, but Dante Moore's not immobile. He's certainly not as good of a runner as Dillon Gabriel. 100%. He could turn out to be a better passer. He's a little bit taller. He's got a better arm. Maybe he accounts for that gap in running by being an even more prolific passer. We'll just have to wait and see. But if I asked you, what do you think is Dillon Gabriel's best rushing performance this year from a yardage standpoint, which factors in sack yardage, but still, I don't expect Oregon's quarterback to get sacked a lot next year either. What do you think it is? 3, 2, 1, here we go. Oregon State. He had a 54-yard run. He had 64 yards rushing on the game. He has not had a single other game where he eclipses 35 yards on the ground. So this Will Stein offense, any offense, can be aided by a mobile quarterback to stay out of sacks, to pick up some big first downs. Dante Moore is not going to be a statue in the pocket. He's not going to be Mariota back there or even dance around necessarily as much as Vernon Adams, but I frankly think he moves kind of similarly to Vernon Adams. He's mobile, but not a runner. I think that's okay. If you move to throw, that's what a lot of the great quarterbacks do. And I'm more than a little intrigued looking ahead to next season to see what Dante Moore brings to that position, what his evolution is like, and how he's able to progress from what he was at UCLA. But with Will Stein's offense, if he's back as Oregon's offensive coordinator, Dante Moore will have everything he needs to succeed. He'll be working in some new receivers, to be sure, but from an offensive line, offensive coordinator standpoint, that'll then come down to him because those two things will be incredibly set, and that usually defines how successful of a position a quarterback is put in. So, hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know. All right, it's Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. It's Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, and Oregon's an underdog. I understand why. What do we think of that matchup right now? That's coming up next. First reminder, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs, they're almost here. But it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Oregon, a slight favorite going into that Ohio State-Tennessee game in a hypothetical with Tennessee, but now it's Ohio State -1.5. Do you think they're crazy? Well, if you do, you can go put your money where your mouth is over at FanDuel, and right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. $250. I'm not yanking your chain here. That's an offer on the table. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up W. I mean, you can bet on which players are going to score. You can bet on how many points a team's going to score. Everything you want. It's over at FanDuel.com. Join today. FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The rematch is on. Oregon, Ohio State. It was supposed to be the Big Ten championship game. Alas, here we are in the Rose Bowl. Now, there's something strangely poetic about this particular matchup. Oregon, Ohio State, Rose Bowl. When I was growing up, back in my day, that was a non-conference BCS game that Oregon really wanted to win. That I really wanted Oregon to win, even though it didn't have direct national championship implications for that particular year. Of course, it did for carrying over to the preseason rankings the following year, but we've done away with all of that. So that was the first thing that popped into my head. The second thing that popped into my head was what Ohio State did to Tennessee on Saturday night in Columbus. That was not a defeat. That was not a big win. That was a beatdown, a thrashing, a take them to the woodshed and beat them with a 2x4. So I was incredibly impressed with Ohio State. And there was one thing in particular I said going in and thought coming out was my number one thing to watch if Oregon ended up matching up with Ohio State again. What is that offensive line looking like? They lost their Remington Award-winning center. Imagine if you took JPJ off of last year's team. How would you have felt? Not great. Not great. And Ohio State went against a really good defensive line in Tennessee. 0 sacks. 0 sacks allowed, which is, by the way, how many times Ohio State sacked Oregon in the game on October 12th at Autzen Stadium. And what was one of the big takeaways from that game? Josh Connerly, Johnny Cornelius. Cha-ching! Money coming their way because those were NFL edges and they didn't get to Gabriel in any consistent way. So that performance for Ohio State's offensive line, incredibly impressive. They lost 2 starters from guys who they would have put on their first 5 up front coming into this year. They have reshuffled a lot and they dominated. They absolutely dominated. Ohio State could run the ball. Will Howard wasn't pressured. They had time to take shots down the field. They took shots down the field again across the board. I actually picked Tennessee to upset Ohio State because I thought that Michigan loss was hanging over the locker room. Well, they have clearly exercised those demons because that was the Ohio State team that we all thought coming into the year could win the national championship. So if Ohio State plays like that, Oregon better bring their A game. That was an A-plus game from Ohio State. How many times this year would you say Oregon has had an A-plus game where they play perfectly complementary football on both sides? The offense is explosive and doing a lot of different things and executing and not getting in their own way, and the defense is just stifling. There have been games where Oregon's done that this year. I think Illinois qualifies as that particular kind of effort. I think Washington was close, but it wasn't quite as perfect. That was only 28-14 at the half. Ohio State was up 21-0 before Tennessee was able to pull their hands out of their pockets. I mean, it was just a thumping, a complete and total beatdown. It was very impressive. I think the Purdue game falls into that category for Oregon, and I think they played incredibly well against Ohio State. Wasn't perfect. Remember, they had the extra point debacles, and it wasn't their fault, but the replay review in the first quarter, there were a number of things. The failed goal-to-go situation in the third quarter of that game, Oregon had some real mistakes. I mean, heck, yeah, they kicked the go-ahead game-winning field, what ended up being the game-winning field goal, but again, goal-to-go, didn't punch it into the end zone. Ohio State's defense has been really, really good inside the 5-yard line this year, but Oregon scored on the first possession inside the 5, and then after that, they had a lot of long touchdowns. So there are aspects of that game that Oregon, non-official related, can clean up and has to be better at if Ohio State plays that particular way. But the offensive line playing as they did, maybe Tennessee wasn't ready for the cold. I don't suspect that was the case. They were moving guys around. They were controlling the line of scrimmage. Chip Kelly and Ryan Day. It turns out those guys are not complete and utter buffoons as coaches and had a bad day against Michigan. No argument here. But they just showcase why they still have national championship potential. Why this is still the closest point spread of any of the quarterfinal games. You've got Penn State minus 10.5 against Boise. You've got Texas minus 13.5 against the Fighting Kenny Dillinghams. And you have got, actually that's not true. Georgia is a slight 1.5 point favorite against Notre Dame. And guess what? The 4 best teams in this playoff, Georgia with Gunnar Stockton, I don't know. But I think Notre Dame is really good. Well, what do you know? So the good news for Oregon fans is if Oregon gets this done, and that's an if, because that version of Ohio State is really dangerous. I'll touch on that more in a sec. But if Oregon is able to get this done, no one's going to be able to say the path was easy. No one's going to be able to say, well, you just caught a break here. Nope, that's not going to fly. So there's the upside for fans. But should you be nervous about Ohio State? 100%. Because just like the matchup at Autzen, this is a coin flip game. If Ohio State's going to look like that, and what we have seen from Oregon, it's a coin flip game. Execution, key moments, special teams, turnover, those sorts of things feel like how the game ultimately gets decided. But going into this matchup, one of you asked me a question, a couple of you did, about, hey, Tennessee or Ohio State, who would you rather play? Who would you rather play? And I said, well, Ohio State it seems the more dangerous of the two teams, but Tennessee's defense can be really good. Tennessee can really run the ball. Look at what Penn State just did to Oregon. And Josh Heupel, though the offense is not what it used to be, is still a good offensive mind. I'm sure he'd figure some things out. But what I said about Ohio State is something that I certainly felt after the game as well. When they lost to Michigan, I didn't view their ceiling as being any different. Because the receivers were still healthy. The defense was still healthy. And Will Howard is still there, and I've seen him play well. He is the only quarterback this season to go for 300 yards or more against Oregon's defense. Only one. So I know that team, that version of Ohio State was still in there. What Michigan showed, at least for a rivalry game, is their floor is different. And that's why I was so intrigued to watch the offensive line, and why? Yeah, I'm more worried about Ohio State now than I was going into the game, because the offensive line didn't just hold serve, play average, do enough to win. They were utterly dominant in that game against Tennessee. And Oregon's defensive line, coming off its worst game of the year, they best figure it out, or Will Howard will chuck it all over the yard. Those deep balls he threw to Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka all day, they were beautiful. And Chip Kelly was in his bag. Shocker, Chip Kelly knows offense. Who would have thought? He had receivers running free all day against a really good Vols defense. Go look at what they did in conference play in the SEC this year. They were really good, and Ohio State torched them. Now, nobody's going to be at home, but the weather's not going to be a factor, whether that helped Ohio State's defense or not. It's going to be nice weather on New Year's Day in all likelihood at the Rose Bowls. It always is. So I think it'll be a great game. I think Ohio State is every bit as dangerous as they have been all year, especially after a confidence boost like that. They did not just beat Tennessee. They absolutely throttled them, and it was from the jump. They were ready to go on both sides, and they dominated. Oregon better be ready to play. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.